It was a night unlike many in Los Angeles. The sky seemed like a stage for a frightening spectacle, with lightning slicing through the dark clouds and briefly illuminating the city before plunging it back into gloom. Rain fell heavily, its thick drops turning the streets into rivers and overflowing the gutters. The thunder was deafening, and the relentless wind made the trees sway violently, their shadows dancing against building walls like ghosts. People hurried home or looked for shelter, protecting themselves from the chaos engulfing the city. But not everyone had somewhere to run. Under a small awning, hidden from the raindrops that insisted on creeping into every corner, sat Lily, a 6-year-old girl. Her large, frightened eyes seemed to take in everything around her as she pressed against the wall, trying to shield herself from the cold that cut her skin like invisible blades. Little Lily was alone. She wore a thin outfit, clearly unsuitable for the chilly night. Her hair was already soaked by the rain, clinging to her pale, dirt-stained face. Her thin arms wrapped around her body in a desperate attempt to stay warm. She was trembling, not just from the cold but also from fear. With each clap of thunder she would jump, her eyes quickly scanning the area as if expecting something or someone to come save her. Yet no one stopped. People passed by in a hurry, umbrellas turning inside out in the wind, muttering complaints or simply ignoring the small, lonely figure. Lily watched them with a gaze filled with hope, as though each face might be that of someone who would help her. But the indifference around her was crushing. She had been there alone for hours, maybe days. With every new burst of thunder, she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to convince herself that at some point it would all end. The awning offered little comfort, but it was the only place Lily had to shield her from the storm. On that cold night, she didn't know exactly how she'd ended up on that corner, but she remembered walking for a long time, guided only by the instinct to survive. It was as though the rain outside reflected how she felt inside, lost, cold, and without hope. Yet even in the midst of chaos, Lily held a small flame of resilience within her. She knew she needed to keep going, even if she didn't know exactly how. Beneath that awning, surrounded by shadows, thunder, and a city that ignored her, she kept breathing. And perhaps at some point, something would change. Maybe, somewhere, someone would realize she was there and reach out to help. Lily's hunger was a deep emptiness that seemed to consume her entire body. Her stomach growled loudly, a constant pain that only worsened each hour. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The cold was already hard to bear, but the hunger felt even worse, giving her no respite. It was like the emptiness inside her was bigger than anything she could face outside. The rain kept falling, but Lily knew she had to do something. She had no strength to walk very far, so her eyes began scanning the area, desperately looking for any sign of food. Soon, she spotted a trash can not too far away. There were papers scattered around it, crumpled wrappers and dirt, but that was her only hope at the moment. Slowly, her legs shaking and her clothes clinging to her body from the rain, Lily got up and went over to the trash can. She looked around, as though afraid someone would see her or judge her, but quickly realized no one was paying attention. The hurried passers-by cared nothing about the thin, fragile girl, drenched and trying to survive. With small frozen hands, Lily began rummaging through the trash. It was unpleasant, but she no longer had room for shame. Damp papers, fruit peels, and old scraps of food appeared as she carefully searched, hoping to find something to fill the void in her stomach. Finally, her eyes landed on a piece of bread. It was small, hard, and moldy on the edges, but at that moment it seemed like the only thing that could save her. Lily picked up the bread carefully, as if it was something precious. For a moment she stood still, looking at it in her hands. It didn't smell good, and she knew she shouldn't eat it, but her hunger left her no choice. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds before she brought the bread to her mouth. The first bite was tough. The sour taste made her cringe, but Lily kept going. She chewed slowly, swallowing with difficulty, her eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't want to think about what she was eating. She just needed that pain in her stomach to ease, even if only for a moment. As she chewed, Lily felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't just the bread that was hard to swallow. It was the reality of her life. She was alone in the cold, eating a moldy piece of bread pulled out of a trash can. Sadness weighed on her small shoulders, but at the same time, something inside her pushed her on. Even without knowing where her strength came from, she refused to give up. Lily finished the bread and leaned back against the wall, curling up again under the awning. The bad taste still lingered in her mouth, but at least her hunger had subsided a bit. In the silence broken only by the rain and thunder, She looked at the dark sky. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, she had made it through another night. And that, to her, was already a victory. While Lily was chewing the last bits of the hard bread, trying not to think about the sour flavor that lingered, she felt something. It was as if someone was watching her. Slowly, she lifted her eyes, and in the middle of the rain and the shadows dancing in the wind, she saw a figure standing just a few meters away. For a moment, fear took over, but then she realized it wasn't a person. It was a dog. It was a German shepherd, but so thin you could see its ribs even under the wet, matted fur. Its eyes, bright and alert, stared at Lily curiously. He looked as lost as she did, with a blend of distrust and hunger on his face. The dog didn't move, just watched her, head slightly tilted and body stiff, as if assessing whether it was safe to come closer. Lily froze for a few seconds, not knowing what to do. The dog seemed scary in his alert stance, but his eyes said something else. They were gentle, almost as if asking for help. Lily's heart, already heavy from everything she had been through, felt something new. It wasn't fear, it was empathy. Maybe because, in some way, she knew what it was like to be alone, starving, and without anyone to trust. Carefully, Lily took the small piece of bread she still had in her hand. She gripped it firmly, but hesitated before speaking, her voice emerging low and raspy from the cold and hunger. "Hey, Latu, do you want some?" she said, extending the bread toward the dog. The German shepherd took a step forward, but then stopped again. He seemed wary, as if unsure whether to trust this small, fragile girl. Lily didn't move. She stayed there, hand outstretched, trying to show she meant no harm. Finally, the dog took a few more steps slowly, until he was close enough to sniff the bread. Lily broke the piece of bread into two and set one half on the ground, stepping back to give the dog some space. He eyed the food for a moment, then looked at her. It was as if he were thanking her before he even ate. Then he lowered his head and devoured the bread hungrily, chewing quickly. Lily smiled. It was a shy smile, but the first one she had in days. Seeing the dog there, eating something she had shared, made her feel a little less alone. When he finished, he lifted his eyes to her again and his tail gave a slight wag, as if to say that in some way he now trusted her. "I think I'll call you Max," Lily said, her voice still low but now a bit more confident. The dog tilted his head, as though trying to understand, and took another step toward her. Lily reached out her hand slowly, and he let her touch his head. His fur was rough and wet, but his body warmth was comforting. In that moment, something changed for Lily. Max wasn't just a stray dog. He was a presence that brought a glimmer of hope. He was like her, alone, but still fighting to survive. Max sat down next to Lily, and she leaned back against the wall, keeping her hand on his fur. It was strange, but having the dog beside her made her feel a bit safer. He seemed to watch everything around them, as if wanting to protect her from any danger. So under that awning on a cold, rainy night, Lily and Max formed an instant bond, something neither of them knew they needed, but now couldn't do without. The following nights brought the same unrelenting storm, but something was different for Lily. Max was by her side. He wasn't just a dog. He was her companion, her friend, her guardian. From the moment they shared that piece of bread, Lily felt Max had become part of her. He seemed to understand everything she felt without words, always there, watchful, as if he knew she needed him. Max wasn't just a lost dog. He had a strong presence, despite being thin and exhausted. It was as though his gaze carried the same determination Lily had to keep going, even when everything was difficult. Whenever Lily shivered from the cold or cried softly, Max drew closer, pressing his warm body against hers. The simple touch of his rough fur was enough to make her feel a little less alone. One night, while Lily and Max were curled up under the awning, something unexpected happened. The street was darker than usual, and the rain seemed to have eased, bringing an odd silence. Lily was almost asleep when she heard footsteps. At first, she thought it was just another person rushing by, as always. But these footsteps were different. They were slow, almost calculated. She opened her eyes and saw a few meters away a man standing on the sidewalk. He seemed to be watching her intently, and there was something in his look that made her shiver from head to toe. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was something that made Lily want to shrink even further against the wall. "What's a little girl like you doing here all alone at this hour?" he asked in a low but cutting voice. Lily didn't answer. She just tried to pull away, her body trembling with fear. But before she could think of what to do, Max was already on his feet. He positioned himself between her and the man, body tense and the hair on his neck bristling. A low growl rumbled from his throat, and his eyes were locked on the stranger, as though he could see something Lily couldn't. The man hesitated for a moment, eyeing the dog. He took a step forward, trying to appear friendly, but Max did not retreat. On the contrary, his growl got louder, and he moved closer, baring his teeth. The man stopped, realizing Max was no ordinary dog. He was a protector. "Calm down, I'm just trying to help," the man said nervously, but there was something impatient in his voice. When he tried taking another step, Max barked ferociously. The sound echoed through the deserted street, frightening enough to make the man step back. Lily, still cowering behind Max, felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Max hadn't moved away at all. He stood firm, as if telling the man he wouldn't let anything happen to her. Finally, the man mumbled something under his breath, irritated, and turned away, disappearing into the darkness. Max kept looking in that direction, still growling until he was sure the man wouldn't come back. Only then did he relax and return to Lily's side. Still trembling, she wrapped her arms around Max's neck, burying her face in his wet fur. "Thank you, Max. You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Max licked her face as if telling her she didn't need to thank him. He was there for her, and that would never change. That night, as the rain began to fall again, Lily realized Max was more than a friend. He was her guardian. With him by her side, the world felt a little less frightening. Morning arrived after another cold, rainy night. Lily woke to the distant sound of hurried footsteps and the faint song of some birds. The sun, still hidden behind thick clouds, brought a hint of light, enough to illuminate the sidewalk where she and Max were. Lily felt the warmth of Max's body beside her, and for a moment she forgot the weight of her hunger and the cold. He was her safety, the only friend she had. As she absent-mindedly petted Max's head, a slow-moving shadow approached. Lily looked up and saw an elderly woman, wearing a thick coat and holding a small umbrella to shield herself from the light drizzle still falling. The woman, who seemed kind, stopped when she saw Lily and Max together. Her eyes revealed surprise and concern. "My dear, what are you doing here alone?" asked the woman in a soft voice, leaning in slightly to get a better look at the girl. Lily didn't answer immediately. She was used to distrust and rejection, but there was something different about this woman's tone. Max, always on guard, stayed by Lily's side but didn't growl. He simply watched, as if he sensed this person wasn't a threat. "It's all right, dear," the woman continued. "My name is Mrs. Collins. I only want to help you. Are you hungry?" Lily hesitated, but at the mention of food, her stomach growled loudly, answering for her. Mrs. Collins smiled gently and held out her hand. "Come with me. We can find something for you to eat, and you can bring your friend. He seems like a wonderful protector." Still wary, Lily looked at Max, who tilted his head as if waiting for her decision. After a few seconds, she slowly stood up, holding tight to the makeshift leash she had fashioned for Max out of a piece of rope. Together, they followed Mrs. Collins through the streets until they reached a small community health center. There, nurses with kind smiles approached to help. Lily was taken inside, where she was given a hot meal and dry clothes. Meanwhile, Max stayed near the door, watching every move to make sure no one hurt his friend. One of the nurses, noticing the bond between the two, smiled. "Is that dog yours?" she asked while Lily devoured her food. She nodded, determined never to be separated from Max. He was everything she had. Mrs. Collins and the nurses understood, and no one tried to take him away. Soon, a social worker arrived to talk to Lily. Sitting beside her, the woman spoke calmly and warmly. "My dear, I need to understand what happened to you so I can help. Would you like to tell me?" Lily looked at Max as though seeking courage. Then slowly she began to speak. She talked about the house where she never felt wanted, the constant arguments, and the pain of not having anyone to hold her. She spoke about how she had left, hoping to find something better, and how she met Max, who became her only support. Her words were hesitant but sincere. The social worker listened carefully, not interrupting, and when Lily finished, she smiled at her. "Thank you for trusting me. I promise you'll never have to go back to a place that hurts you. We'll take care of you and Max." Lily wasn't sure if she could believe it, but the social worker's tone sounded genuine. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. Mrs. Collins gently patted Lily's shoulder before saying goodbye, leaving her in the care of the staff at the center. Over the next few days, Lily was placed in a safe shelter for children, where she received comfort and care. Naturally, Max went with her, Everyone understood that he wasn't just a dog, he was an essential part of Lily's recovery. He continued by her side, loyal and protective, while social workers worked to find a new home for them both. At that moment, for the first time, Lily felt that things might get better. She was no longer alone, and the world, which had seemed so cold and indifferent, now seemed to have a place for her and Max. Lily was welcomed into the orphanage with care and kindness. The place was small but cozy. Children of different ages played in the yard, and the adults taking care of them seemed to strive to make everyone feel at home. Yet for Lily, none of this was easy. Even with a roof over her head and hot meals every day, the feeling of being just another child there made her uneasy. She knew the orphanage was only temporary, but she couldn't imagine what came next. Max was always by her side. He quickly became a favorite with everyone in the orphanage. The children loved to pet him and play with him, but Max remained loyal to Lily. Wherever she went, he followed. He understood that to Lily he was more than a dog. He was her anchor, her comfort in a world that still felt very scary. A few weeks later, the orphanage director, a woman named Mrs. Baker, called Lily in to talk. With a welcoming smile, she said, "Lily, I have good news. A couple, the Johnsons, is interested in meeting you. They are very kind people, and they really want to have a daughter." Lily was silent. The idea of having a family sounded good, but her gaze quickly shifted to Max, who was lying beside her. Mrs. Baker noticed the worry in Lily's eyes and continued, "I know you're worried about Max, dear. I'll talk to the Johnsons about him. I promise I'll do my best to make it work." On the day of the meeting, Lily was nervous. Sitting in the visitation room, she clutched Max's makeshift leash tightly. When the Johnsons walked in, she watched them closely. Mrs. Johnson wore a kind smile and had neatly styled grey hair. Mr. Johnson seemed warm, with a gentle look in his eyes. They introduced themselves and began talking with Lily, trying to get to know her better. "You seem like a very special girl, Lily," Mrs. Johnson said, smiling. "We're so happy to meet you." Lily responded with a small smile, but she kept hold of Max as if afraid someone would take him from her. The Johnsons noticed the bond between them and exchanged glances. After a while, Mr. Johnson finally spoke. "Lily, we know Max is very important to you. To be honest, we've never had a dog at home, and that makes us a little unsure. But we promise we'll do our best to understand this situation. We just need some time to get used to the idea." Lily's heart sank. They seemed like good people, but hearing that Max might not stay with her was devastating. He was her family, her most loyal friend. Even so, she nodded, trying to hide the tears threatening to fall. In the days that followed, Lily constantly thought about Max. The Johnsons had decided she would spend some time with them to adjust, while Max stayed at the orphanage. The promise that he could join her later was a faint hope, but for Lily, each day without him felt like an eternity. On the morning she left, Lily hugged Max tightly. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I'll come back for you, Max, I promise." Max licked her face, as if saying he understood. But when she got into the Johnsons' car and looked back to see Max sitting at the orphanage gate, the emptiness in Lily's heart was almost unbearable. The Johnsons' house was beautiful, with a big yard and a bedroom just for Lily. They were kind and did everything to make her feel comfortable. Yet no matter how good they were to her, Lily couldn't feel complete. At night, she held a photo of Max that Mrs. Baker had given her, crying softly as she missed him. With each passing day, the absence of Max grew harder to bear. The Johnsons noticed that despite all their efforts, Lily still seemed distant. They began to realize that Max wasn't just a dog to her. He was part of who she was, and without him, Lily could never truly feel at home. Something needed to change, and the Johnsons knew it. The Johnsons' house was everything Lily had never had: spacious, comfortable, and filled with nice things. In the bedroom they prepared for her, there was a soft bed with a floral comforter, toys on a shelf, and a large window letting in sunlight. Mrs. Johnson invited Lily to help in the kitchen, and Mr. Johnson read her stories at night. They were kind, patient, and truly seemed to care. But despite all that, Lily couldn't feel at home. Around every corner, at every meal, every moment she was alone in her new room, Max's absence seemed to echo within her. She couldn't stop thinking about the look on his face when they said goodbye at the orphanage gate, about how he was always there by her side, protecting her. Without Max, nothing felt right. At night, while the Johnsons thought she was asleep, Lily stayed up hugging Max's photo that Mrs. Baker had given her. She stared at it until her eyes filled with tears. It was as though part of her had been left behind. The emptiness she felt was so overwhelming that even with all the Johnsons' efforts to make her happy, Lily couldn't truly smile. The Johnsons noticed Lily's sadness. She was polite and always thanked them for what they did, but her eyes were always distant. She hardly ever played with the toys they'd given her and spent hours looking out the window, as if waiting to see Max coming down the street. "Is everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Johnson asked one evening, sitting next to Lily's bed. "You seem unhappy here." Lily hesitated before answering, her gaze fixed on Max's photo in her hand. "I like it here," she said softly, "but I miss Max." Mrs. Johnson sighed. She knew Max was important to Lily, but she hadn't realized how much. Later that night, she talked to Mr. Johnson. "She's miserable without that dog," she said. "No matter what we do, he's clearly the most important thing in her life." "I know," Mr. Johnson replied thoughtfully, "but we've never had a dog, and you know it might be a big challenge for us." Even so, the Johnsons began to see that if they truly wanted Lily to be happy, they needed to consider bringing Max into their lives. But time was passing, and no decision had been made. For Lily, each day felt longer than the last. One night she could no longer hold back her tears. Lying in bed, hugging Max's photo, she cried softly, her chest tight with longing. She didn't know how to live without him. He was the only thing that had ever made her feel safe and loved. And in that moment, Lily made a decision. No matter how hard it was, even if she wasn't sure how to do it, she needed to find a way to bring Max back. He was more than a friend. He was her family. That night, while everything was quiet and the Johnsons slept, Lily lay in bed looking at Max's photo. The emptiness she felt was unbearable. She knew the Johnsons were good to her, but without Max, nothing made sense. She felt that if she really wanted to be happy, she'd have to do something herself. That was when she decided she would return to the orphanage to find him. Carefully, Lily grabbed a small backpack and tucked in some clothes and Max's photo. She picked up a flashlight she'd found in the Johnsons' garage and opened her bedroom window. Despite being afraid someone would catch her, she slipped out the window and carefully climbed down. The night was dark and cold, and the wind whipped through the trees, but Lily was determined. She began walking through the almost empty streets, guided only by the weak beam of her flashlight and her wish to see Max again. She passed alleys, crossed avenues, and avoided the few cars on the road. Her body was tired, and the cold stung her skin, but she kept going. With each step, her mind repeated just one thing: "I need him. I promised I'd come back." When she finally saw the orphanage gates, Lily's heart pounded. She went around the wall looking for a way in until she found a tree close enough to help her climb. With an effort, she climbed the tree and jumped over the wall, ignoring the pain when she hit the ground. She stood up quickly and ran toward the kennel where she knew Max might be. "Max!" she called in a whisper, her voice shaking from the cold and emotion. At the back of the kennel, she saw a figure lying down. It was him. When Max lifted his head and recognized her, he ran toward her. Lily hugged him tightly, burying her face in his fur. Tears of relief streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I promised I'd come back for you." Max wagged his tail and licked her face, as if telling her he'd missed her too. But the moment was interrupted by footsteps approaching. Lily turned and saw a man holding a flashlight. It was the orphanage security guard, and he looked startled to see them. "Hey, what are you doing here?" the man shouted, breaking into a run. Lily panicked and tried to pull Max away to escape, but the guard closed in fast. Max, sensing Lily's fear, positioned himself between her and the man, growling low, as he always did to protect her. When the guard tried to move closer, Max lunged, trying to keep him away. Then the guard stumbled, fell, and shouted. His flashlight fell to the ground, and in the confusion, Max got hurt while trying to defend her. Max collapsed, panting, and Lily ran to him. She clung to him desperately, tears streaming down her face. "Max, please stay with me," she begged. Realizing what had happened, the guard called for help. A few minutes later, orphanage staff arrived, and a veterinary ambulance was called. Lily refused to let go of Max while they waited. When the paramedics arrived, they explained that Max needed urgent surgery and took him to a clinic. Lily went with them and spent the entire wait in the cold hospital room praying. Clutching Max's photo in one hand and the blanket the nurses had given her in the other, she murmured, "He's all I have. Please don't take him from me." Hours later, the veterinarian appeared, looking tired but calm. "Max is a strong dog. He'll make it," he said, sitting beside Lily. "But we had to amputate one of his legs. He'll need special care, but he'll adapt." Lily breathed a sigh of relief and couldn't hold back her tears. All that mattered to her was that Max would live. Soon after, the Johnsons arrived at the hospital. When they saw Lily and realized the depth of her bond with Max, something changed in them. They understood that if they truly wanted Lily to be happy, they had to accept Max as part of their family. "Lily," Mrs. Johnson said, kneeling next to her, "we're taking Max home with us. He's part of your life, and we want you to feel at home. We'll take care of him together, okay?" Lily didn't answer right away. She just hugged Mrs. Johnson tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. The Johnsons kept their promise. When Max finally left the clinic, now with only 3 legs, he was welcomed with affection by the whole family. Back at the Johnsons' home, Max quickly adapted. He continued to be Lily's faithful protector, and now more than ever he was part of a new family. With Max by her side, Lily finally felt complete. For the first time, she believed she could be happy again. Together, they overcame hardships and started a new life, united by love and understanding that no obstacle could break. The days following Max's arrival at the Johnsons' house marked a true new beginning for Lily. The home that once felt strange and distant now began to feel like a real home. It wasn't just a place where she slept or ate. It was now a place where she could smile again. Even with 3 legs, Max showed an energy and joy that inspired Lily to stay strong. Mr. Johnson built a small ramp so Max could move more easily. He spent hours adjusting it so the dog could explore the yard where Lily loved to play. Mrs. Johnson, in turn, taught Lily how to care for Max, helping him adapt to the changes that came with losing a leg. It made Lily feel useful and even more connected to him. Every morning, Lily woke up with Max lying beside her bed, as if he never wanted to be far from her. They would go out into the yard together, where she ran around while Max tried to keep up, tail wagging happily. Even with his new condition, Max didn't seem discouraged. He was a living testament to overcoming obstacles, and that gave Lily strength. "You're amazing, you know," Lily would say to him as she hugged him, feeling the same sense of security she'd felt since the day she found him. The Johnsons worked hard to include Lily in every aspect of their lives. They took her and Max to the park, letting her choose the weekend activities. Lily began to smile more, and her laughter, once so rare, now filled the house. One day, while sitting on the couch with Max by her side, Lily looked at Mrs. Johnson and said, "Thank you for letting Max stay with me. I think he's saved my life more times than I can count." Mrs. Johnson, tears in her eyes, replied, "He's special, Lily, but so are you. And together you've shown us what really matters, caring for those we love." Over time, life at the Johnsons became stable and happy. Lily started going to school, something that once seemed impossible. She was nervous at first, but with Max waiting for her by the door when she got home, each day felt less scary. She made new friends and even told them how Max had saved her. They were thrilled by her story, and many asked to meet him. The house, which had once been just a physical shelter, was now filled with laughter, conversation, and tender moments. Lily started painting pictures of Max, hanging them on her bedroom walls as reminders of how much they'd overcome together. Each time she looked at him, she felt a mix of gratitude and love that she could never fully explain. With time, Max became more than a protector. He was a symbol of strength and hope for the whole family. Whenever things got tough, Lily remembered everything they had been through and knew that, with Max by her side and the Johnsons' support, she could overcome anything. Now, Lily finally had something she had never imagined possible: a real home. She was no longer lost or alone. With Max and the Johnsons, she found a new beginning, filled with love, safety, and the promise that better days would always come. And so Lily and Max show us that even in the most difficult situations, love, courage, and hope can change lives. This is a story of overcoming hardships, friendship, and the power of never giving up, even when everything seems lost. If you also believe that stories like Lily and Max's can inspire others, leave your comment down below. We'd love to know what this story meant to you. Don't forget to like the video if it touched your heart, and to subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.